Seahawks landed on Mike Macdonald as Pete Carroll's successor. It is an in-depth article published earlier this morning through Sports Illustrated that looks at the behind the scenes, the Seahawks hiring of Mike Macdonald and everything that goes into now working on this program. Albert Breer, author of this article, joining us now. You guys already know who Albert Breer is. Joining us now on the Emerald Queen Casino Sportsbook Hotline. Hey, Albert, how's it going?
What's up, guys? How you doing?
We are so happy to have you. We read this article this morning. We talked about it on air about an hour ago, leading into this conversation. And Albert, what stood out most to me is John Schneider's focus on making clear, like, hey, we're still borrowing from a lot of what worked. You don't just kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to an organization. Is that something that really resonated with you in these conversations?
Yeah, I mean, that was what was sort of unique about this one is, 9 times out of 10, like I said in the story, a new coach comes in and he's inheriting something broken. I don't think that's the case here. And, while there probably was some things that needed updating or changing or evolving, the bones of the program were good that Pete left behind. And, I can remember, this 2 summers ago now, sitting down talking with Geno Smith, and he talked about like continuing to come back, and this was before he even won the starting job, and the reason why he kept coming back on 1-year deals, and he said what attracted him there in the first place, and what he found when he got there was a really unique culture, a really unique atmosphere that was different than anything he'd ever been a part of, and so I think it speaks to like how how player friendly that place has been, and how how different it's been than so many other places in the league, and how attractive it's been to players. And so, I think instead of deconstructing that, the idea was, how do we build on it? How do we find somebody that can take what we've done and enhance it? And so, I think that's probably why they shied away from getting the more of the taskmaster head coach, like a Mike Vrabel or a Bill Belichick, that comes from that sort of tree, and we're looking for someone who could kind of add, again, like just kind of the next step of what was already in place there, and you listen to the energy when you hear Mike and John talk together, right? Like, and I had them together. You can really kind of feel that. You can really feel like how. Like the energy that had been in that building remains there. And so there's some challenges that come along with that, by the way, that we can get into. But, certainly, I think Mike's embraced the idea that he's inheriting something that has, a good foundation for him to build off of.
I'm glad. And when the pick was made, or Mike was hired by the Seahawks, that's the feeling that I got, because I felt like, Albert, that he's young enough to have fresh ideas, but also young enough to know that you should lean on some things that have some success. So if you could look at, what you got from John Schneider and Mike Macdonald, what would you say is the thing that resembles Pete the most, and the thing that makes this program absolutely Mike Macdonald's?
So I would say the thing that resembles Pete the most is probably the energy, right? Like, so I think, you listen to those 2 guys talk when they're together, and you can feel that, and you can hear it, like I said. I also think that it's like the idea is to maximize every player, which is exactly what Pete was, right? Like, how can we maximize every player, and how can we build something that has real identity and, has a real clear vision? And I can remember talking with Pete about this years and years and years ago, where one of the problems that he had with the Jets and the Patriots before, going to USC and then ultimately Seattle, was that because of the way the organizations were set up, he couldn't really carry out his vision. And he did have a real clear vision for what he wanted, but he couldn't quite get the organization all where it needed to be to carry out that vision. And Seattle gave him that chance. I think it's the same thing with Mike, where he's got a very clear vision for what he wants. When I think it veers from Pete is probably more the schematic stuff. Pete, like a lot of the roots of what Pete did was very simple and built on playing fast, and there were very strict prototypes for certain positions and what you needed and certain spots and out of certain roles, and all of it obviously worked. I think Mike, my feeling at least, is that Mike is going to be looking for more flexibility in everything that he does because this is where he's from, right? Like, so you're probably going to have a deeper well scheme-wise than you have there for a little while, and you're going to have versatility be very, very important trait for players, And you can see that with the way if you watch the way Baltimore plays, right? Like Baltimore had a bunch of guys who could play inside or outside at corner, had a bunch of guys who could play on the line as pass rushers and still, drop off the line and play in coverage. On offense, like all the things that the Ravens did on offense were based on deception and really having guys who could do a number of different things. I think Zay Flowers was a great example of that as their first-round pick last year, right? So, I think that that's probably where he veers a little bit from Pete, and that, like, where, Pete's schemes were built largely on simplicity and athleticism and prototypes. I think what you'll see with Macdonald is probably a little bit more flexibility and versatility being emphasized.
Albert, you've not just covered the NFL for a while. That also means you've covered a lot of head coaches being fired and a lot of new head coaches coming in. I would imagine that a lot of those scenarios feel the same, right? Like if you're firing your head coach, you're kind of a mess of an organization, but it's not always the case. How does Seattle look different to you, if at all, from an organization that typically does move on from a head coach?
Well, I mean, like I said, like you're normally broken, right? Like so, but there is an advantage to that, right? Like there is for a new coach coming in. Like, I mean, if you come into a broken scenario and the team just went 2-14 and the roster's in rough shape and there's not young talent there, well, like as a coach, then you come in, you have control right away, right? Like you come in and you can tell the guys, like, look, like what you were doing wasn't working, so do it my way and we'll get different results. You have a lot of guys in that roster right now who won under Pete Carroll and who played well and developed under Pete Carroll. Geno Smith went through a career renaissance under Pete Carroll. There are a ton of young players, Charles Cross, Abe Lucas, Devin Weatherspoon, like lots of guys on that roster that should be, foundational to where the Seahawks are going that were either developed or enhanced by Pete Carroll. So, when you're walking into a situation like that, it's not as automatic, right? Like it's not as automatic as if, you were walking into a 2-14 team. You probably are going to have to sell those guys a little bit more. And those guys might want a little bit more input because they were doing things that were working, So I think that's a little bit more of a challenge. And, it was interesting talking to Mike about it because I think that's sort of the difference between the subtle difference in the challenge he faced at Michigan versus the challenge he faced at Baltimore, where, Michigan, he was going into a place where they weren't very good the year before. The defense had been good, but they weren't very good the year before, and the guys didn't really know him. When he got to Baltimore, he had sort of, I think, maybe dipped his toe in the pool instead of diving right in on changes because he knew all of those guys and he had been there before and they had been so successful. And so, I think those two experiences, a subtle difference, the experience he has as a coordinator from Michigan to Baltimore, I think serves him well here because it prepares him for the challenge he faces in inheriting a situation that's not broken.
Hey, Albert, my wife and I do this thing. She's my business partner, right? And when we go out to these lunches or wherever, and we're talking business, and a question is, I guess, sent to me or sent to her, and it's not our expertise. We can take it to a certain place, and right before we get to that place where we're done, we kind of give each other the look of the nod, and then they automatically, or she automatically takes it over, or I take it over, and we kind of bounce off each other like that. Is that the type of feel you got with these two? It's like, all right, I'm going to take this answer as far as I can, but I know this is where John comes in, so I'm going to send it his way and vice versa.
Yeah, it was like a natural. I mean, they just sound natural talking together, which I think is a big part of it. And that's what you're probably looking to come out of the interview with, like, quite honestly. And, there's a lot of unknown when you're only meeting with a guy twice before you hire him. But, through your research and then through the rapport that you're able to build, if it comes really easy, that's a good sign. And I think that was I hope you guys took that from the story, that was a big part of it for the two of them, right? And I think some of that trust was reflected in, Mike and his staff consciously taking a step back during the draft process and, letting John Schneider and his scouts go to work. Because right now, they're the ones who've done all the work. They're the ones who sort of established things. And so, obviously to get input from your coaches, but the coaches were able to kind of take a step back here and let the process play out. And I think that was one thing that was really encouraging to Mike and his staff too, was that watching that play out, they wound up with the sorts of players that those guys would have drafted if it weren't up to them anyway. And you'll see how that evolves over the course of years. And the coaches obviously be more involved in year 2 than they were in year 1, and year 3 than they were in year 2. But the early signs were really good that rapport was there.